Hello.
Hey, this is Megan. Oh,
There we go.
I need to change my name so people see who this is. How are you?
Good. How are you?
I'm good. Um, awesome. Hey, good evening, everybody, and welcome to our virtual panel. My name is Megan Moriarty. I'm the Deputy Director at the Museum of Boulder, and I'm so excited to see all your faces tonight. Hope everybody's warm at home. Let's see. Before we get started, huge thanks to the team at Wise Boulder, Leah Brenner-Clack, and Patty Bonet, especially Patty, who did all the behind the scenes work to make this happen. Thanks also to the museum team that helped us do the marketing and all that jazz while I was out of town. So a little bit about what we're going to do tonight. We're going to chat about art and activism as advertised. I'm going to do some questions. We're going to take audience questions also. So audience, if you have any questions, feel free to pop them into the chat, and Patty's going to help us manage that. We are going to take a little dance break at 7. So prepare for that if you're going to need to grab a snack or do a little dance or hit the bathroom real fast. We'll do that at 7. And let's see, so a little bit about the Museum of Boulder. If you don't know, we are Boulder's local history museum. We've been around, we're just about to celebrate our 76th year. And one of the things we like to do at the start of meetings, and especially when I'm talking about the history of things, just like to recognize that we are on stolen land. The Treaty of Fort Laramie in 1851 granted this land to the Arapaho and Cheyenne tribes, and the land where the museum sits and probably where many of you are today does not belong to us. So just always want to acknowledge that. We can perhaps talk more about Indigenous issues as we get into the conversation, but just like to lay that out in the beginning. Let's see, so we are here, part of Streetwise Boulder's annual Mural Festival. And so to start things out, we are going to I'm just gonna share my screen, and we are gonna watch a quick video about the festival. In case you don't know anything about it, just gives you a quick overview. So bear with me one second while I do that. Okay. All right, so Zoom is telling me I need to upload some audio things. So we are not gonna do that. And instead, I am gonna drop the link into the chat and y'all can watch it. It's a great video. Thank you, Renee, for your comment. Appreciate it. So there's the YouTube link. We're gonna use the chat also for artists to share links for things that you can look up later. So feel free to refer to that. So let's see, I think we're gonna start with some artist bios and panelist bios so we know who we're talking about tonight, and kind of everybody on this panel has a fantastically long kind of list of accomplishments, and so I tried to give you the brief highlights so we can dig more into things later as we're chatting. But so just want to start with Greg Deal. Pyramid Lake Paiute Tribe is a provocative contemporary artist who challenges Western perceptions of Indigenous people, touching on issues of race, history, and stereotypes. Through his work, which are paintings, murals, performance art, filmmaking, and spoken word, Deal critically examines issues and tells stories of decolonization and appropriation that affects Indian country. He has been heavily involved with the media activist movement, Change the Name, and Deal was recently included in the National Geographic Society magazine article, Native Americans are recasting views of Indigenous life. So welcome, Greg. Greg, do you want to say a few words just in general about your art before we jump into all the other questions?
No, I mean, I mean, I want to leave time for everything else, and I mean, you can look me up, you can find me.
Okay.
But I'm very happy to be here.
Yeah, and Patty just dropped an Instagram link in there with some of your recent work, so folks can check that out. So next up is a National Geographic Adventurer of the Year and global activist, Shannon Galpin, who has many accomplishments, some of which I'll mention here. She's the founder of the nonprofit Mountain to Mountain and co-founder of the wildlife conservation organization Endangered Activism. She's a passionate believer in public art as activism. And she created the groundbreaking street art installation Streets of Afghanistan in 2011. She's currently working on a large-scale mural collaboration and the 400 Project, a social justice youth initiative, which teaches social justice and anti-racism through the lens of art as activism. So a great addition to our panel. Shannon, you want to say hi to everybody? I think Shannon's muted, but Shannon's going to speak up in a second, unless she wants to jump on right now.
First time Zoom on my phone. Sorry about that. Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me on tonight.
Yeah, thanks for joining us. Looking forward to chatting more about your work. All right, so Denver artist Jolt is up next. He was heavily influenced by his artist father, the murals that decorated his Sunnyside community, created by the Chicano muralist movement of the 1960s, and the graffiti culture of New York City from the 90s. For the last decade, he has produced and directed various videos and short films. To date, his most notable mural is the 1099 Osage mural that is the largest mural in Colorado, and he utilizes his art and public speaking to create cultural consciousness around the history and future of Denver's communities, arts, and culture. Hello, Jolt, good evening.
Hello, thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for joining us. All right, so the first three folks I introduced are all creating murals as part of Streetwise's festival this year, so we'll talk more about that. And then we have some other local folks joining us. Allison Burbeck recently graduated from CU Boulder with her master's in art history. Her research falls within the realm of public art, specifically muralism, graffiti, and street art, and the discourses of public sphere theory and urban theory. Her master's thesis examines the history and legacy of Chicano muralism in the neighborhood of La Alma Lincoln Park in Denver. And recent appearances of street art murals in the neighborhood have transformed it, these distinctly Chicano public spaces, negatively affecting longtime residents' sense of belonging and signaling the gentrification of public space. So definitely something tonight we want to talk about is how murals can impact neighborhoods potentially in a not positive way. I know Jolt has thoughts about that too, so we'll definitely talk about that. But hello, Allison. You want to say hi to everybody?
Hi, thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for joining us. All right, so DJ Joel, you just heard him playing us some tunes. He's a man of diverse passions, which I learned a lot about this afternoon while Googling you, Joel. They're all connected by the unifying thread of art, human connection, and delivering an analog experience in a digital world. Most recently, he launched JD's Joyrides, a Boulder-based e-bike rental and tour company. And through that, he offers mural tours that showcase the wealth of public art in Boulder. As the Vibrarian, he helps people discover the music they didn't know they love. And since 1990, Joel has been a DJ producer at KGNU, and he co-founded Conduit, which is a human-curated streaming music service. Say hi, Joel.
Hello, great to be here.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for providing the tunes too.
My pleasure.
Yeah, super glad to have the next panelist with us, Katrina Miller. She has over 20 years of experience in the field of video production. We've had the pleasure of working with her for a number of years at the Museum of Boulder. You can actually see some of her work in our current exhibit since March. She'll probably talk about that a little more. Storytelling and visual art have always played a big part in Katrina's life, and she relishes creating something where there was once nothing. Katrina wants to put a spotlight on what's going on in Boulder's Black community, who often feel unseen and kept on the periphery. She recently received a grant from the Creative Neighborhoods to kickstart a film documenting elderly African Americans in Boulder during COVID. So welcome, Katrina, and thanks for joining us. You want to say hi, Katrina? You might need to unmute. Okay, we will check in with Katrina later. I know she has plenty to say. So, coming up next, we have Marlo Baines, who is a very accomplished 18-year-old from Boulder. She's the youth director of Earth Guardians, and she's worked tirelessly to push back fracking in Colorado. So thank you for that, Marlo. She was the lead organizer for the Colorado climate strikes and the MC for the big event in November 2019, where she had the pleasure of introducing Greta Thunberg. This event catered to Indigenous and frontline community youth sharing their experience and their solutions to the climate crisis. She's written and self-published her first book of poetry called Little Black Book, A Young Activist Love Story, and that is available on Lulu and Amazon. So hello, Marlo, and thank you for joining us.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you. So another very accomplished young woman is our last panelist. Last but not least, Masani Salazar. She's from Taos Pueblo and Santa Ana Pueblo. She's a recent graduate of Centaurus High School, and she now attends CU Boulder. She's a 2020 Dairy Arts Center student producer, and she was a photographer with the Indigenize Your Eyes project. And she uses art and photography to tell the story of Indigenous people in Boulder and offer a more nuanced perspective of Native youth and contemporary American culture. So she's the co-chair of the American Indian Youth Leadership Institute, and she recently received the Boulder County Community Action Program Youth Award in 2019. So that is a pretty amazing panel we have here. And I guess I wanted to start with just a general question for everybody to answer, and especially the muralists who are working in Boulder this week. What stories are you hoping to tell through the murals that you're painting this week? What things are on your mind, and how are you turning them into art that we can all share? So we can go in order, or if somebody wants to jump in first, feel free. All right, so I'm gonna call on Greg to go first.
All right. I'm actually doing a piece that's specifically about missing and murdered Indigenous women. The previous mural that I did about a month, maybe a month and a half ago in Colorado Springs was about that. But it was kind of a different setup because it was also a nod towards modern Indigenous existence. The girl pictured is got a red handprint on her face, and but she's also wearing a band T-shirt, and she just, you know, it's meant to be modern and sort of contributing to representation, which is something that Indigenous people don't really get too much of. This one's kind of along the same lines, not nodding as much towards modernity, but going with something a little bit different than I've done in the past. Still a portrait, still a red handprint on the young girl's face, but I'm also kind of playing a little bit with the lighting. But we wanted something that would challenge me a little bit and still sort of be a nod to where my head's at creatively right now.
Yeah, and where's that gonna be, Greg?
I am behind the Boulder Theater.
Oh, awesome, in that alley?
Off of 14th, yeah. And Shannon is in there with me as well.
Oh yeah, that's a great wall. That's exciting.
Yeah, so I was painting it today, just trying to get base coats down. I'll be working a little bit tonight and hopefully trying to make some headway and finish up tomorrow.
Awesome. Shannon, do you want to share what you're working on for the festival?
Yeah, you bet. Like Greg said, I get to work in the alley with him. So it's a great location, first of all, which is really fun for Boulder. All of my murals tend to be geared around social justice. And the murals that I've been working on most recently, the last couple of years, have really focused on the erasure of women. So in various themes of women's rights. But my work over the last decade has focused on erasure of women, and whether that's been in Afghanistan, where most of my women's rights work has been, or whether that's been back here around gender violence and stalking. And this mural in particular, I decided that I really needed to look at the Black Lives Matter movement as one way of tying in my own work with women's rights and the erasure of women. And there had been a big push that had been going on in Afghanistan around a campaign around women's names, and the fact that Afghan women don't get to use their names. They don't have their names on national ID cards. They often don't get their names on their own gravestones. And often their names aren't on their own children's birth certificates. It's sometimes an insult for men to use the name of another man's wife or sister. And so while we're talking about the Black Lives Matter movement and really trying to bring awareness of the Black women who have been lost to police brutality in the Say Her Name campaign, the two were really kind of juxtaposed in my head, that there's so much power in a woman's name and the erasure of women. And I had been working with some female women in Afghanistan around this campaign, and just the power of a woman's name to fight for that right to be seen. And then back here, we're just trying to get this recognition through the Say Her Name campaign, to not lose these women in the media, to not forget who these women are who are being lost to police brutality. So even as a white woman, I wanted to be really careful where I step into Black Lives Matter, particularly in mural movements. But in this particular case, as a woman and the erasure of women, I really wanted to find a way to do a mural that was around Say Her Name, but then add another layer to that, which was, how do we humanize them a step further? And so the mural is going to be about 40 names of Black women who've lost their lives to police brutality, but then also some of the characteristics that we forget when we only think of them as a name. So Breonna Taylor being a medic. We have a military vet. We've got a police, sorry, not police. We have a postal worker, their grandmothers, their granddaughters, their aunts, their wives, their lovers. There's transgender and lesbians, and all of those names are wrapped up in this mural.
Very cool. And so when are you going to be working on it if folks want to come out and check you out?
Greg and I just came off the wall about 10 minutes ago. He started and I started on Monday, and then I got kicked off because of the snow. So I know he's back up tonight, and he'll be working all day tomorrow, and I'll be doing the same.
Nice. Awesome. Jolt, what are you working on?
My piece is already finished. I finished it Monday night.
Nice. Got it in before the snow, huh?
I painted it in the snow. I got up there like 11 p.m. and finished about 2:30 in the a.m. So
Wow.
it's already finished. The piece is a representation of my Chicano culture. It says "Viva la Raza" in the center. The typography that I used is a type of typography from East LA. Type of writing that you don't just pick up. It's something that you're handed down, that you grow up with. On top of the piece is a cross. It's not a religious cross though. It's called a Pachuco cross, and it comes from the 40s, from the Zoot Suit era. Around the outside of it, there's chains that represents the strength of our people, and then on the bottom there's two hands shaking, one brown hand shaking another. It's unidos, varios unidos. It's a unity, a representation of unity. I did all of those things because I'm aware of of our role as Chicanos that we've played in Boulder for a long time, and we often go unheard and unseen. From my father's era with the Brown Berets, they did a lot of activism in Boulder. Los Sies de Boulder, the Boulder Six that were bombed in 2 different car bombings. The scholars that we've had in Boulder on CU campus for years with UMass and Mecha. I also worked in Boulder for the I Have a Dream Foundation and the Bridge Project and Eco Arts. And during those times, I worked with the Latino community in Boulder. I worked in the housing projects and the trailer homes, and it's a nod to my people. It's a representation for them. But also just the Viva la Raza is a power to the people, if you will. So, it's for anybody that comes from that struggle that is proud to represent where they come from.
That's awesome. Thanks for doing that. Where is your mural?
I don't know. It's in an alley up there somewhere. I don't know. They sent me the address, and they gave me a really, really tiny wall in an alley.
Leah, do you know where it is? Oh, that's awesome. And Patty is dropping the links in, so you can click on and see the photos, especially Jolt's work that's already done. So in thinking about expressing your art or your activism through your artwork, like what do you hope folks who are driving down that alley, what do you hope they think when they see that mural, Jolt?
Well, I hope that it speaks directly to my people, and I hope that when they see it, they know that we're present and we're represented. I also hope that when people see my art present, that they see street art that came from the streets being present in an event. Because these days it's very trendy to call yourself a street artist and not be of the street at all. It's the event itself is called Streetwise, but how streetwise are a lot of the people in Boulder that are participating in this event? And I think that my presence shows a presence of a real artist from the streets, real street art that came from the streets. So I'm not only representing my connection to that art form, but also my connection to the Chicano community and that activism.
Yeah. So that's a great lead in. Allison, do you want to talk a little bit about your master's thesis and this research that you've done around the connection between public art and gentrification, especially in Denver, in the Chicano neighborhoods?
Yeah, so I recently, finished my master's thesis in May. And through the whole process, I worked with an organization called the Chicano Murals of Colorado Project. And specifically like Lucha Martinez, who has a strong connection to Chicano muralism. Her father is Emmanuel Martinez, who painted many murals in Denver specifically. And basically, I'm going to drop a link also to the Chicano Murals Project website, so everyone can check it out. But basically my research was looking specifically at the neighborhood of La Alma, Lincoln Park in Denver, which is a neighborhood that has strong ties to the Chicano movement that took place in the 60s and 70s. Lots of Chicanos lived there and still live there. That's where Manuel Martinez created many of his murals. Specifically, one iconic one is La Alma at La Alma Recreation Center. So there's, this really great history of Chicano muralism, a great visual heritage here. But, recently, in the 21st century, there is this kind of rise of street artists who come in and paint something on the streets of a very different aesthetic. And I argue that that kind of takes away from the visual heritage that Chicanos have created here. Like what Jolt was saying, if you see his mural, you see his ties to the Chicano community, you see that Chicano culture, that history. And if you're from that community, you feel represented and seen and included and feel like you belong where you are. But that can be, threatened with a kind of different aesthetic that we see today.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Joel, I'm wondering if you can jump in and kind of these mural tours that you're doing, how are you exploring some of these themes of identity and representation through art, and like how that shows up in the murals that have been done in Boulder so far and that are in process? Oh, can you unmute? Oh, we still can't hear you.
How about now?
You're great. You're great. We got you.
Okay, great. That's a really good question. I've really sort of hatched this JD's Joyrides bike tour idea just like in the last 5 weeks, and I've been super heads down with just getting it all together. But now that the festival's here, I've taken a spin around most of the murals, and I'm really just trying to absorb as much as I can about each of the artists and what's going on, and just try to gain some like overall context. And then really it's gonna just sort of play out. I definitely, want this tour to expose a part of Boulder that's not just about the Flatirons and Chautauqua and Pearl Street Mall and all that, but really kind of shows a bit of the cultural life, the artist life, the cultural life, the underground life. And I don't know, I have still have a lot to learn, but listening to each of you talk, I'd see that, getting into that context will be an important aspect to present through the tour. So
yeah, and it seems like it could be pretty powerful for folks who've even lived here for a long time to perhaps learn more about our history through some of the murals that are up now in Boulder and going up soon.
exactly. And it's really, it's not just about taking people around to look at the pretty pictures, but I've got a lot to learn in a short amount of time to really be able to express what's happening. But I'm hoping that people are going to pick up some of this from hopefully meeting the artists when we show up at these murals, mm-hmm. and getting something from them. And
awesome.
Yeah.
Cool. I want to go on one of these tours. So let's move on to some different types of art. And I want to bring Katrina into the conversation. Katrina, you present such powerful photo and video art. And so I just wanted to invite you to talk about, one of the projects that you're working on now. I know you're working on a couple. So if you wanted to either talk about the COVID project or some of your other work around Black Lives Matter and capturing Black history in Boulder, if you just wanted to share how those videos are a representation of your beliefs, we'd love to hear a little bit about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the projects that I'm working on is The Silence of Quarantine, and this is a video that is focusing on the African American community, the elderly African American community during quarantine. And as African Americans here in Boulder, we feel pretty unseen in a lot of ways, and I think that this is kind of a segment that definitely has not been seen or talked about at all. We talk a lot about the elderly, and we think about it, we consider how they don't really have access to technology and whatnot, but you just take that one step further to people who already feel far removed from everybody else. So I follow this woman named Elmira Davis, and we also take a look at some of the other people that we're losing in the community. And it's just so much that they're not able to even grieve each other. People are dying, and people are not able to go to the graves and create community. And I think right now, as we're all so, just going through so many different things with the COVID, with the execution of Black lives by police, that we do need community more than ever. So I'm just really doing a highlight of that. So
yeah, that's awesome. What's the finished product's going to be? A video?
Yeah, the finished product's going to be a film, a short film.
Awesome. All right, so another artist who's exploring media different than murals is Marlo. And Marlo, I wanted to ask you, I was just kind of like, as reading your bio and learning a little bit about you, just wondering, how does your environmental activism feed into your artistic process?
So I was exposed to the world of environmental injustice in my early teens. I had the privilege and honor to go up to Standing Rock and to see the movement up at Standing Rock against the Dakota Access Pipeline. And I came back really raw and exposed that, people are being hurt, communities are being hurt by the corporations that are propagating climate change. And so for the past few years, I got involved with Earth Guardians and now have moved into this youth director role. And I've seen the necessity for the intersectionality between community and collaboration between one another. And so as somebody who, when I was younger, I was very much into art, I felt like I lost it a lot when I came into high school. And this past year, I have this kind of crazy high school journey, but I did independent study for 2 years and decided to go to school for my senior year. And there I felt like I could start to finally settle, because the last 2 years, like my sophomore and junior year, were very crazy. I felt like all of a sudden I could like breathe and see that I had an opportunity to not only take my experiences, but write about them, paint about them. And so this book that I published, it was kind of a part of a senior project, but it was also just such a passion project of mine, that I was able to pour my heart into these poems that really talk about, where we're at in this world and how confusing it is and how hard it is to be, some youth who's like trying to, fight for our future. And that it's so not just about, the world warming, but rather the communities that are being affected. And how can we use, privileges? How can we use our different, our differences to create the change that we want to see? So there might've been a bit of a roundabout answer, but I guess just continuously, whatever I'm seeing, the people that I'm being exposed to have really, really influenced my art. Because as I say in one of my poems, it's not just I anymore, but it's she and him and her and all of us, that I have been able to begin to represent and show through my art and my activism.
Wow, yeah, and that's so cool. I haven't had a chance to check out your poems yet, but I look forward to kind of learning more about your passion for environmental justice through that poetry. I think that's such a cool way to express your views and what you've seen through all your social justice work. So Masani, I was wondering if you could tell us, kind of similarly to Marlo, how you have brought together art and the work that you've done with American Indian youth and Indigenize Your Eyes, and kind of how those sometimes I think folks who maybe haven't done some of this work think that those things can be disparate and not connected, but do you see them as connected, and how have they connected in your life?
So I'm a part of AILI, American Indian Youth Leadership Institute, and I'm like one of the co-chairs. And so we do like projects. Well, we used to do conferences every year, and like have a Native youth gather and then like talk about like Native American problems, like especially here in Colorado because there's not a lot of us. And since we don't get like enough funding to do the conferences anymore, we decided to do a workshop instead. So this workshop is called Indigenize Your Eyes, and it was pretty much a photographer that went to Standing Rock too. He helped us like learn the camera, and so once we learned it, the youth, there was like a group of like 7 of us, we got to use cameras that were like rented out to us, and then have like our own voice and put it up into Boulder,
Yeah,
for Indigenous Peoples Day.
Yeah, and so you all did a couple different things with the finished photos, right? You did some wheat pasting, so some large scale prints, right? And then you did the smaller show, or the smaller prints were in a show at the museum, and I know a few other places. What was the reaction to the community, especially to the larger installations that you did, like the wheat pasting at NARF and the dairy? What was some of the feedback you heard from folks?
The feedback was like usually or I don't know, the objects that were like in the pictures were like either people from the community. So like if I was in a picture, or if like one of my like friends were, they would like reach out to us and be like, oh yeah, I saw you like at the Boulder Museum, or like I saw you on the side of like that wall in Boulder. So it was just like a mixed, and like everyone was like happy about it, and like thought it was really cool that like we were doing this and like showing that Native Indigenous people are still here.
Yeah, yeah. So that it's interesting. I think all of you have touched on this issue of representation, and whose story is told and how is it told is something we talk about continuously at the museum, and really try to interrogate that. I'm just wondering if any of you wanted to share, kind of similarly to what Masani did. What's been some of the most powerful feedback you've received from your public artwork, and how has that either affected your future work or changed the way that you think about the power your artwork can have?
I can start.
Yeah.
It's funny because when I was doing my like environmental activism, my climate justice work, sometimes you can get stuck in this pigeonhole of just organizing events, or putting on different trainings and workshops. And when all of a sudden I was able to start expressing myself through poetry, through writing, all of a sudden it felt like I had shifted the trajectory of what I need in my life to be happy and to be like fulfilled. And it came from people just saying like, like this poem really spoke to me, like this is really supportive, this is beautiful. And there's sometimes just these little like sparks that have been able to provide me to keep moving forward, to keep creating, because it's not just about me creating the art, but it's also about the impact that people feel around it. So
Yeah,
that's what I would say.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Shannon, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, one of the mural series that I did was a love letter series. And it was a series about stalking and harassment. And I was using love letters that had been written to me from an actual stalker that had stalked me for 3 or 4 years, and recreated them as ransom notes. So kind of a cut and paste style that I wheat pasted, but then created them very colorfully and kind of very beautifully, so that they were these beautiful poems that, if you didn't know were sent from a stalker, were beautiful love letters. So the interpretation on a wall, if you walked by, were these really lovely love letters on a wall. If you knew they were from a stalker, then they were incredibly dark, and they had a very sinister feel to them, as they should. And you only really get the ability to give the interpretation of that during a festival, or if someone dives into your website or your Instagram to find that. But during a street art festival, when I was installing one of the first ones, everybody would stop and walk by, and I would hear them, and they would be like, oh wow, it's so beautiful, I know they'd be reading this kind of the first few lines as it being installed, and then I would turn and be like, well, do you want the full story? And I tell them what it is, and the women would all respond. To a woman, almost everyone had a story, whether it was street harassment, gender violence, stalking, harassment. Almost every woman. Several men did as well, which was telling. I have never had so much cathartic energy in an alley.
Yeah.
And it was fitting to have it in an alley. There were hugs, there were tears, there were high fives.
Yeah.
And it was the power of having a very dark message created through art in a public space. And it's the reason that more women are needed in street art, because it is the reason that more diversity in general is needed in street art. Why we need all sorts of different people of all sorts of different backgrounds creating art, because everybody's story can resonate in different ways.
Yeah, for sure. Anybody else want to jump in on that issue of representation and feedback perhaps you've gotten? Jolt, go for it.
So, I spend my life in alleys, painting in the streets. I picked up a spray can in '93. I come around when there's festivals somewhat, but for the most part, this is my lifestyle. Last year, I did a mural for Colorado Crush, the Colorado Crush event. And I painted a rhino, which represents the Rhino Art District. And I put that rhino, I put on top of the rhino some of the usual characters. I put the white girl doing yoga. I put the white girl street artist. This is like a new trend for anybody to jump into street art. So I had the white girl taking the picture of the selfie, and she has a spray can, and she's really playing the part. She's being really street. I put a wolf running around the legs of the rhino. That represents Ken Wolf, who is this vicious developer down in the Rhino District.
Yeah.
The guy riding the rhino, he's the guy that runs the Rhino Art District. He has his big bags of money. And they're really charging full speed at this little lady, Shirley Castro. She's a little vieja from the hood that's been around forever. She's a badass. She's really tough. And she played a big part in the Chicano civil rights movement. She's protecting her house with a tortilla roller. And she's stopping all this gentrification from just coming in and taking her out. And then on the wall, there's a quote, and it says, your street art is nothing more than wallpaper for gentrification. I got a lot of reaction from that. A lot of people wanted to be down all of a sudden. They definitely jumped behind me when otherwise they wouldn't. I started to notice that ARTivism, activism, the trend of it at that time. Around that time, I tried to apply to do Wise Boulder, and I was asked not to do anything political or reminiscent of that piece. People were scared I was going to stir things up in Boulder, and Boulder wasn't ready for that. This year, I said, okay, I'll do one of my gorillas. And I was asked, no, you got to do something that has to do with activism. I thought that was really funny. That was a trip to see how the trend had changed so quickly. That was an interesting reaction. We've been getting a lot of reactions. I just had a piece that was taken out of History Colorado. I believe Greg Dill's in the show as well over there. It's called American Democracy. And because of what I was representing in the piece, because I spoke on the KKK, because I spoke on Trump, and also because I used typography, because I used words, they pulled my piece from the show, and I was censored. It's bringing all these things are bringing up this conversation of who are these self-appointed gatekeepers within our culture? Who are these people that are giving these tours, talking about our culture, walking through our neighborhoods and our communities, talking about it and informing people? Who are the people that are doing these events that are saying who gets to express themselves and even guiding us as to how we should express ourselves? And should you be putting yourself in the position as a gatekeeper? Should you? Or are you stepping in, and are you gentrifying a culture? I think that's a big conversation that keeps coming up with me, because all the censorship and all the things that I'm approaching and all the reactions I'm getting from my pieces that are ruffling feathers seem to be from people that are uncomfortable with it because they're from outside the culture, but they put themselves in a position as a gatekeeper within the culture. So yeah, I've been getting some reactions, a little bit.
That's good. I mean, so, sometimes the reactions are what cause those good questions to come up, like who are the gatekeepers and who is kind of limiting access. Allison or Greg, is there anything you wanted to say about this? Greg, you were just name checked. Allison, this seems like something you've studied a bit. So if either one of you want to jump in on this topic, feel free. Greg, go for it.
Yeah, this is actually really interesting. Yeah, I had a similar experience with History Colorado. I have some work up there, but there's a painting that I made before I gave a TED talk, and it tells a story of a child that goes into boarding school. For those of you that are not familiar with Native boarding schools, you should Google it and prepare to be put off by that. What happened in this story is this young boy went into a boarding school, and the first thing they do is they bathe you, they force you to cut your hair, they give you new clothes, they put a talc on you because they think all the like Native children are dirty, and they want to make sure that they're not bringing lice into the space. And so as this woman is preparing this young boy, she notices that his knees and his elbows are darker than the rest of him, which is pretty normal for people with melanin in their skin. But she thought he was just dirty, and she took a wire brush and she scrubbed his knees and his elbows until they bled. At this point of the day, it was the end of the day, and so they put some pajamas on him or whatever, and they put him to bed, and he spent most of the night crying and creating noise. So by the time an adult finally comes in, they're mad and upset because he's making noise, and when they turn the lights on, they see that he soiled his sheets because he's bleeding. And they take him into the back room, and all the kids in the boarding school can hear, and they beat the kid until he dies. Nobody ever sees him again. And I painted a piece about that that I had never shown, and so I had an opportunity to do something with History Colorado, and they decided not to include that piece. I took it up there, I dropped it off. They knew it was coming. It wasn't blindsiding anybody. And the powers that be decided not to put it in because the boy in the image is standing nude. You can see his butt. And they thought that was too much. The reason why I think I'm telling this story in terms of like representation is that we are in a space where we're just beginning, people of color, to have an opportunity to tell our stories. And I'll tell you, people of color, we are tired of people telling our stories for us. We are absolutely just over it. There's a young street artist here in Boulder. I was just looking at his stuff. His stuff's in the alleyway that we're at. His name's Smile. He's got images of natives in headdresses. He's got no business doing that because he doesn't have a stake in the game. I don't care how inspired you are. There's a story there, and there is specific nuance to those images, to what they're wearing, and nobody should be telling that story but a Native person. And we're seeing, through the street art medium, we're seeing people taking these things and they're painting old men in headdresses because it's cool. There's probably a dozen paintings in Denver alone of murals of natives with headdresses. And most of them have not been painted by somebody who is either a North American native or a Plains Indian, who is really where the headdress comes from. And the truth is you don't have a stake in the game. And what that does, the counteractive aspect of that is that when you tell those stories, when somebody sees that and they think your work is so good, and then they commission you to do it, they bring you in to do it, you're taking that away from a person of color. You're not giving an opportunity for a person of color to represent and tell those stories themselves. And I feel fortunate to be in a position to really be able to do this myself. But it's not an easy game. When I first started, I was told to tone it down. Be less Indian is what they said. And I was told that, these stories, and even now, I have a little bit of notoriety, and even now I'm being told we can't hang this painting because it's too controversial. The story's true.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter if it's controversial or not. The story is true. And the intersection of that concept, particularly with Black Lives Matter movement and everything that's happening, it is affecting all of us. Every person of color, every gender spectrum, it is affecting all of us. And I'm grateful that we have an opportunity to back up Black Lives Matter, because the things that are happening there are overflowing into these other communities that also have a stake in this game of marginalization in the United States and in Western culture. But the representation that's there is so vastly important. When I was a kid, the representation that we had as a Native person when I was a kid was Looney Tunes. And if you've never seen the old Looney Tunes, you got to look it up. It's crazy. They're on YouTube. Dances with Wolves, Last of the Mohicans, sports mascots. Well, we're now in a place where we have access to more information, more images are being put out there. There's more representation. So young people can grasp more than just what I had when I was young, which is fantastic. But there's still people that are taking our voices away. And that's where the problem is. But what I think should be done, this is just my opinion, you can take it or leave it. I think that people of color should pull no punches, should make their statement as boldly as they possibly can and with integrity. And I think that those are the things that we need, because we need to not just represent, we need to take back our stories, and we need to put them out there from our mouths, not from the mouths of other people who saw something once.
Yep. Thank you so much, Greg. Katrina, did you want to chime in on that?
Yeah, so I saw that a link to my Black Lives Matter music video film was released, and on this chat. And the thing was there was this protest in Boulder for a whole weekend back in June. And I went just because, just in so much pain over what happened with George Floyd and what has been happening, and the conversations that I've had to have with my children, especially my Black son. And I needed to go somewhere where there was community and people I could talk to. And that's what made me go to the protest that weekend. And I brought my camera just because I do. That's just what I do. And I show up and I see that there are no Black photojournalists, no Black reporters, nobody, and it was really important to me, studying journalism, studying history, that there was that representation, that the story was told of what was done that weekend, and that it was told, and that it was told the right way, so that's really what inspired me to create that video. I wasn't going to do it at all, but I saw, if I'm not going to tell this story, who's going to tell it, and are they going to tell it the right way? Are they going to say what really happened? So yeah, representation is it's really important. I wanted to chime in and mention that.
Yeah. Thank you, Katrina. Allison, did you want to add anything to this conversation about representation and feedback as it pertains to your research?
Well, I just wanted to jump in on Jolt's point, and when we're talking about gatekeepers. I mean, I've compared what's happening like in Rhino, which someone pointed out in the comments is really 5 points. It's Cole, it's Elyria, Swansea, it's Globeville, which is home to these marginalized communities, Black Americans, Chicanos, and is now, we see it with crush walls. Street art has really fueled gentrification in this area. And, there's kind of a similar thing going on in Loma Lincoln Park. And it's interesting because the gatekeepers of these walls, it's property owners, it's developers who want to throw up fancy apartment buildings and don't really care about the communities that live there already. So, I mean, it's just another interesting point about gatekeeping and who's controlling who is allowed to paint where and when, and what story are they allowed to tell.
Yeah, for sure. So Shannon.
I'd just like to add something to that. Really building especially on what Greg is saying, and just this idea of gatekeepers, and I think just storytelling in general, because obviously I think, we all know this doesn't just apply to America. This is global, but I think, I worked for over a decade in Afghanistan, and I think that what I see happening in Afghanistan is really indicative, because what we do here, we also export. And I think that's also really important. What we have done here, we export in terms of our foreign policy, We export our values or our lack of values. And in Afghanistan, we do that and it comes out in the way in which we storytell our narrative in countries that we continue to, it's essentially like a modern day colonization that we do through, war, foreign policy, how we control that narrative. And one of the most important ways that we can encourage a change of that narrative is how do we empower locals to have a voice. And that's really difficult in countries like Afghanistan that we have poured so much money into, and the media has its own narrative, and that narrative is terrorism, that narrative is women are victims. And it's really difficult to have that narrative change. And there's so much invested in that, but art is a really key way because the media will pick up on it. Kabul is a city that is covered in blast walls. The buildings are all surrounded by blast walls because of suicide bombs, and it became a city that had a blank canvas, essentially. And so a group of us were able to essentially train modern university students that were going to study art. They were already artists, but they had no exposure to street art. There were no spray cans in Afghanistan. But they were already talented artists. They just didn't have the skills for murals or for street art. And there are no laws against it because there's never been such a thing. And there is now a thriving street art scene in Kabul, which I would encourage anyone to Google just for new inspiration to understand that street art can thrive in a war zone. Street art can have this social justice, very authentic social justice. And when it comes down to voice and having the capacity to literally, feed a revolution is happening in Kabul. And that's not something that gets told very often, but it's a way for women to have a voice. It's a way for the youth generation to have a voice. And it's something that, I always try to get out because people never think to look at Afghan graffiti and Afghan street artists.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's a really important point about changing the narrative through art. Joel, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I forgot my point, but I'll say this for the time being. To be a street artist, you should come from the street. You should come from the street culture. You should be aware of the streets. Your art should represent what's going on in the streets. You can't bring whatever it is that you're doing in your studio and oppose it on the streets if you're not spending time within those streets. I think that that's very important.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Masani or Marlo, before we take a quick break, is there anything you wanted to add to this from the point of view, like the youth perspective in terms of, we always talk about like young people think this or that. I think, another part of representation is just age. And Katrina mentioned it with some of our elderly folks, but is there anything you wanted to add from the youth angle? All right. Okay. Joel, will you play us a song so we can take a quick bathroom/dance break?
Gladly.
Okay. So Joel's going to play us a song. We're going to come back in like 3 minutes. So if you need to take a break, turn off your video, do whatever you need to, and we'll be back. And drop some questions in the chat so we can keep things going and it's not just me talking.
Saying nada, I'm people, y'all see through. I see you. Happy Thanksgiving, man. Love is love, man. Kool-Aid, the best rapper in the world. Kool-Aid, the best rapper.
Dame un chin chin, un chin de gasolina, prendeme el fuego, fuego a mi cocina. Dame un chin chin, un chin de gasolina, prendeme el fuego, fuego a mi cocina. Dame un chin chin, un chin de gasolina, prendeme el fuego, fuego a mi cocina. Dame un chin chin, un chin de gasolina, prendeme el fuego, fuego, fuego.
Expando o campo léxico, conexão Brasil-México, latino pique, anaconda, que lindo, forte bomba, continente Guantanamera, neguinho lá do Cachoeira, rima de segunda, terça, quarta, quinta-feira, sexta-feira, sem pagar madeira, entendeu Camilo? Tem que colar com nós, sem vacilo, vai entender que é aquilo, vai seguir bem tranquilo, colando com nós. O peão na ladeira de cross, os favela, não com os playboys, os vilão, não com os heróis. Pode
walk every day till your fingers are raw. What's the point if you don't feel nothing at all? We've been used and abused, we can't take anymore. Got a right, show your light, sleepers hear my call. So wake up, tell me what do you feel? It's a new day, a new thought, that's what is real. So wake up, till it's joy that you feel. Cause life's energy is all that is real.
Dame un chin chin, un chin de gasolina, prendeme el fuego, fuego a mi cocina. Dame un chin chin, un chin de gasolina, prendeme el fuego, fuego a mi cocina. Dame un chin chin, un chin de gasolina, prendeme el fuego, fuego a mi cocina. Dame un chin chin, un chin de gasolina, prendeme el fuego, fuego, fuego. Chin chin, gasolina, fuego, mi cocina. Chin chin, gasolina, fuego, mi cocina. Chin chin, gasolina, fuego, mi cocina. Chin chin, gasolina, fuego, fuego, fuego. Fuego, fuego, fuego. Fuego, fuego, fuego. Fuego, fuego, fuego. Fuego, fuego, fuego.
Said I'm gonna make things happen, yeah. We're gonna make things happen, yeah. Said we came to this town to go anywhere but down. Said we're gonna make things happen, yeah. Said I'm gonna make you dance, yeah. We're gonna make you dance, yeah. And so everyone around is gonna know how we get down. Said we're gonna make you dance, shaking your ass.
Right. Back to the All right. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, so we have, let me turn my video back on. Okay. Thanks for not all running away. Thanks for coming back. We have some great questions in the chat. So let's see. Janet's asking, saying, I'm thinking about how European art, my heritage, has been shaped by patrons for as long as I know. So the art that was done is what was important to them, opulent religious art, etc. Wondering how you disrupt that dynamic that continues today. So anybody have thoughts on how that dynamic of patrons or kind of more affluent rich folks deciding what gets created? How does any of, Greg? Go for it.
This is actually a really big issue in contemporary Native art. much of the art market dictates what the work looks like. So everybody wants to run down to Santa Fe. There's a mix of artists down there where it's native and non-native, but the subject matter is all the same. And so it's all cowboys and Indians and stuff like that. And the problem is that that's what is expected by mostly white patrons, that they want to buy an authentic cowboy and Indian painting that was painted by a real native person to hang in their, in their whatever winter home in Park City, Utah. And so what that does is it dictates the entire market, which means that a contemporary artist that wants to create work that is wholeheartedly in the same realm as contemporary art for, say, a white artist, becomes a risk, because if I paint something or if I create something that does not fall into that narrative, which is a narrative that is predicated upon the gaze from the outside and not informed by actual Indigenous people, then that means that I'm creating something that's not familiar and therefore would be difficult to participate within the same arena as a contemporary white artist. And so this is the power dynamic, because it's a power dynamic. This is about money. If you want to make a living as an artist, you got to sell work, and the only way to sell work is that you have to play ball by creating the work that's going to move, that's going to sell. And for a group of people like natives who tend to be on the lower spectrum of the economic scale, that's a very, very serious situation, which means that they're creating work that is dictated by a market and not creating work that is dictated by their own experiences and consciousness. And so that's a pretty significant issue. The change is required to essentially just have the guts to be able to step outside that in some way. But every native artist is essentially had to play into that. I can't speak obviously to other marginalized groups, but I know that that's a pretty serious one for native artists.
Mm-hmm. Any of the other panelists have thoughts on disrupting that dynamic, or have you dealt with that in your art practice? Joel? Oh, can you unmute?
I think that graffiti vandalism has and always will be a great equalizer in them sorts of situations. Sometimes a tag properly placed over a mural is more poignant than that mural itself. I believe that when work starts to come into communities that doesn't belong, the community needs to take it upon themselves and eradicate it. I'm not all about just creating beautiful pictures. Sometimes creating an ugly picture says more.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Anybody else? Thoughts about this? All right, okay, so we got a bunch more questions. So Renee has a question about art and activism. How can you use your art and influence to help those affected bring systemic and cultural change? Big question. Another big question, follow up. Do you feel responsible to help the communities that you're including the social justice narrative from? Anybody want to tackle those big questions from Renee? Shannon, go for it.
Well, I mean, I look at it from the flip side, and I'm an activist first and an artist second. So I started as a social justice activist and I was an artist, but my social justice piece was first. Mm-hmm. So I tend to use art as a form of expression and as a form of social justice. I use my art and work with communities as a form of voice. And as a, the artists that I mentioned in Afghanistan are using their art as a way to fight against corruption. They're using their art to fight against, to fight for peace, literally, in a war zone. Their art comes back to, peace initiatives. It comes back to corruption. It comes back to gender violence for women. But also, here it's, working with, climate justice. It's working with women's rights, the stalking piece, Black Lives Matter. And so pieces where I think, where it's around identity and other issues, I think that you definitely have I personally believe that you definitely have a role to play in either working with communities, working with the next generation of artists, in some way. I think that there's a way of engaging with the next generation or with your own community in some way. I don't think that that you can separate from that.
No, I agree with that too. Coming from an institutional point of view, there's no sense in the gatekeepers telling all the stories. Greg, I know you wanted to jump in here.
Yeah, I appreciate Renee's question, and I think she may know part of the answer I'm about to give. As a Native person, we already have obligations to our community. We already have obligations to youth and to elders, to our children and to our partners. So that already kind of plays a role. I don't feel the same way about my existence as Shannon in terms of like where activism is and where art is. I'm an artist first, and that may have something to do with the fact that, I come from people that believe that artists are also to some degree medicine people. And so there's an obligation that goes with that. But on the other end of that, I'm part of a group of people that when I have an opinion, that suddenly that makes me an activist. That when I express my everyday experience, then that suddenly means that I'm saying something profound. And it's not profound. This is the experience, as being an Indigenous person, that when I'm talking about missing and murdered Indigenous women, I'm talking about that because I've lost relatives. I'm talking about that because I have 2 girls that belong to our tribal community. I'm talking about that because I want to be a good relative. I want to be a good community member. I want to be a good neighbor. And those things all fall in line with the work. But I'm also selfish about my work. I'm going to talk about the things that are important to me, the things that have affected me. And I recognize that my Indigenous experience is also a shared experience. And so if for some reason other Native people grasp onto an art piece that I created or words that I say, I take that responsibility seriously. But I do not, under any circumstances, start in a place of what can I say to move everybody so that I can place myself into a level of importance about this issue. I'm not concerned about that. I'm not concerned about being the first one to talk or the last one to talk. I'm not concerned about having the space to myself. I want to share that space. I want other people to talk. I want other people to tell their stories. I believe there's enough room for all of us. And so that comes into play too. I mean, activism is a funny thing, what one person calls an activist, another would call an adult with an opinion. It just, the difference is usually who has the microphone. And the stories that we tell, particularly people of color, are just vastly important and need to be heard. And it's clear by the national discussion that we're having on race and equity that those stories need to be heard and represented. So yes, I feel an obligation or responsibility to those things, but that responsibility does not start in the art, but it starts in my connection to the very issues that I'm talking about, because those issues affect my household, they affect my children, they affect my family. And so it's a different way of looking at things, I think. I don't know, if that's the same experience that other people are having.
Thank you so much, Greg. Marlo, I know you wanted to share something too about this topic.
I did, but if anybody wants to go before me, feel free.
Okay, you're it.
So I guess I'll more talk specifically to the climate justice movement in the past few years. You know, as a young person, obviously I've not been around a lot longer than, you know, the elders who've come before me. But something that I wanted to just express and make clear, because, you know, we're also doing this in Boulder, which is mostly white. And there is serious levels of racism that is interwoven within our culture here. Is that when I started here, you know, I was the youth who would walk into the room and everybody, you know, would turn eyes to me. But at the same time, like, I did not have the same answers to the questions that they did. And the other thing too is that I was not representation. I am a white girl. I'm a white woman with blonde hair. And it became more and more apparent throughout the years. And I just wanted to share the story of when the Greta march happened, the Greta rally that we held. I remember seeing, I went to New York when there was the big march last year in 2019, September. And something I came back to Denver with is, you know, there was not a sense of community when that rally happened. It seemed like it was just this big gaudy event with, you know, these big stars coming up onto the stage. And, you know, from what I've heard is that a lot of the BIPOC communities were not heard. They were not there to express themselves, even though, you know, there was these big things, you know, big names and big conversations about, you know, the impacts on lower income communities, but they weren't bringing in the communities to talk about these issues. So in coming back to Colorado and hearing that Greta was going to do this talk, or was going to have this climate strike on Friday, I remember calling up Tomas and Renee and Simone from the International Indigenous Youth Council and just said, you know, I've seen that there's not enough representation, and what can we do to actually represent these people? Because I want to be there as, you know, as much of a support, but I know we can't do this. And so we tried to, as you know, as you said in my bio, this initial entry point, that it was this whole event to bring awareness to how BIPOC communities are being affected by fracking well sites and a worse air quality and all these other things, and bringing their voices into the conversation. And, you know, throughout the whole event, it was pretty much a success, because a majority of the time there was, you know, these BIPOC youth who were getting onto the stage. Mostly it was women led. It was beautiful to see. And at the same time, after we all left and went home, the only media that came out about it was about Greta and her talk, which was about 3 minutes long. And then the other person who was portrayed next to her was myself. And so after that event, there was this big wake up call, I felt like, for myself, where I was all of a sudden like, whoa, I could get, you know, all of this representation for what I've done for communities. And at the end of the day, that's white saviorism. And that is some of the problems that we're having right now, is because these people tried to come in and say, we're the white saviors. We're trying to civilize people. And it's created the problems that we are here today. And so in taking a step back, you know, I've been really trying to do the work of making sure that when people are saying that we need representation, we're actually bringing that representation in. And it's not just about having BIPOC people present, but it's actually giving them a voice, giving them have a place at the leadership position in organizations and campaigns and projects, and continuing to see that that is an issue that is going on throughout of a lot of climate justice organizations, because you'll see these photos of Black and brown people on these posters, but when you go to the actual organizing body, the staff of the organizations, it may not be as apparent as what's externally visible and what's internally visible, and that really, really needs to shift. So I just wanted to bring apparent like those few things is like in Colorado, in Boulder in specific, it feels like there is a lot of, you know, the sense of white saviorism, or we know what's best, when that's not the truth. And that we do have community, there's culture within Boulder. And I think that people try to sweep it under the rug sometimes. And, you know, it needs to be expressed, it needs to be shared. So I just, you know, I want to say like big shout outs to all of you who are doing murals. Thank you, Jolt. Thank you, Greg, for having these conversations. Thank you, Katrina, for bringing this forward, because this needs to happen to wake up. I want to say wake up, the white people within Boulder, and at the same time, it's about making you white people feel uncomfortable. And I'm saying that as a white person, because we don't have the answers. So I'm going to stop talking now. But I just wanted to bring up those few things, because it's just been some experiences that I've had in the past year that are, I'm hoping will start to shift the conversation.
Yeah, thank you so much, Marlo, for sharing that from your personal experience. I want to give the other panelists who haven't had a chance to say anything during this part of the Q&A to jump in. If there's anything you either want to share regarding your connection to the community, representing the community that you come from, the issue of disrupting the patronage that goes on sometimes in the art world. Is there anything, either Allison, Katrina, Masani, Joel, I don't think you've said anything this go round. Feel free to jump in. Okay, well, I'm gonna, Masani, go ahead.
When our wheat paste went up to show Boulder, it was really cool, because I think it brought a lot more people to come to the Indigenous Peoples Day at the amphitheater. So it brought awareness when they saw why are all these pictures being posted up, or what does this mean, or what's this project. So I thought that was really cool what we did last year, and it can't be recreated this year, sadly. So
another time. Awesome. So we have a few other questions here, and I think I'm going to try and combine a couple. Let's see. So Patty's interested to know if there's any place in street art for middle-aged white activists like her. And then Janet had a question about her role potentially as a gatekeeper. And so she was asking, she's saying she's thinking about how I can help and stay out of the way. So what's the difference between being a gatekeeper and being a facilitator? And so if any of you want to address that issue, how folks have either been a better facilitator rather than a gatekeeper in the past for you, or how you've seen folks be good allies in these spaces, if you have any suggestions or advice. Okay, well, I can try to answer this question as a white lady who works for a history museum. I think one of the things we always try and do is slow down, right? I think a lot of times institutions and organizations move quickly. White people in general tend to move quickly. We want to get stuff done, right? And I think, Greg, you alluded to this in one of your earlier answers, but just kind of taking time to have everybody's opinion be shared. And so it's not necessarily just the activists, but other members of the community who might not be seen necessarily as leaders in terms of how an institution would see them. And so that's one of the things that I've tried to incorporate into my work at the museum. And then also obviously just letting people tell their own stories. And so creating the spaces in the exhibits where, we're not curating them, but folks are curating them themselves. And if anybody else wants to jump in on that, I'd be happy. Allison?
Yeah, I just was going to say that, as a white woman who's researching and writing about Chicano muralism, I think it's important for me to always keep in mind that it's not about me and it's not about my ego or the glory that I might get from writing about this. It's about the community at the end of the day, and making sure it's a fine line to walk between telling a story with the community and telling a story for a community, if that makes sense. But yeah, at the end of the day, it's not about me.
Yeah, definitely.
I'm going to jump in and just say,
Shannon, you have your hand up? did somebody else have
I
something?
was just going to answer this. Can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead.
I just wanted to say that I'm lucky in that I teach these memoir writing classes, and I'm actually not telling the story. I'm just creating a space for people to write their stories.
Yeah.
And so I'm lucky that I'm not having to do that thing that you're struggling with, Allison.
Yeah, thank you, Janet. Shannon?
Yeah, I mean, I think, I hope this is obvious, but I think in terms of the gatekeeper, I mean, if you're a gatekeeper looking at, you know, if it's something where you have a committee, if it's a museum, a festival, you know, and what color are you and what color is your committee and what gender is everyone, and how, if you're straight, do you have LGBTQIA representation? I mean, just looking at the representation and diversity and, you know, look at the demographics, because traditionally it's old white men. And as a woman, I'm tired of having my work judged by old white men, and I'm sure most of the rest of the panelists are as well. I'm tired of that being the standard of which we're being judged, because obviously that is poor gatekeeping. And then you take it down a level and say, okay, what, you know, take off the old, then it's white men. Take off the men, and then it's white, and then take off the whites. You know, like now, and then take off straight. So start making it that, and that should just be number one. That should just be, if you're talking about gatekeeping, that's just the basics. But I don't think that I still, and I know that everyone here has dealt with that, but at the same time, that just does not seem to be getting through. Every museum, every festival, every seems to still be the predominance of white men, and then obviously straight white men, straight white women, you know. And so we need to diversify that first as our gatekeepers, or else we're all going to be judged by the same standards we've been judging for the past centuries.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Or I'm always in favor of getting rid of the gatekeepers too.
Well, yes, that would be
but
burn the whole system down, yeah. But I don't think we're going to be there yet. I would love that next. But
yeah. So let's, go for it, Joel.
I said, if we're going to do that, y'all got to reflect on yourselves. I grew up in these neighborhoods that you guys are coming into and doing murals. And the big thing about street culture is you can't come into this and rewrite the rules. You really can't. It's okay to do public art. It's okay to do an artist that brings your work into public, but that doesn't make you a street artist. And it doesn't give you an opinion on this culture. This culture has been around since the 70s, since the Bronx. I grew up in North Denver. Our means of expressing ourselves was painting art in our community. We didn't even go to neighborhoods we weren't from and create art there without a pass. I don't go to the Bronx. I don't go to East LA unless I call first and I have a pass. I have a welcome and I'm rolling with people. I don't try to go in and express people that I don't know and I'm not welcome to the table. I've seen the new trend in street art is for women like you, Shannon, to step into our world and have these opinions. And you're not unaware of the struggle that's going on right across the street, but you maybe know a struggle that's going on overseas. And that lends you some sort of validity to speak on it. But you don't even know what's going on in the East Side or in the projects of Boulder or whatever. And I'm just listening to all this and I'm wondering, at what point do you reflect on yourself?
Well, to be fair, you don't know me.
Yeah.
And reflect. And I am very aware I wouldn't go into LA or the Bronx. And I'm very aware that I go into the places that I am invited. And I don't go into that place. I'm very aware of street art culture. I'm very aware of graffiti culture.
No, you're not.
Okay.
So I think we are at 7:30. This, as always, when you get a group of folks together and try and talk about something as huge as art and activism, there is plenty more to say. And I think there's always more to say in terms of who are the gatekeepers, who's in charge, whose stories are told. And so I thank all of you for sharing tonight. I'd love to end and have all of the panelists, if they feel like it, if you feel up to it, share something that's inspiring you these days. I know through quarantine, I was really inspired by a bunch of watercolor artists and trying to get back into my own personal art practice. And so if you have suggestions for folks who are inspiring you that you want to share with the group, we can end with that. We can also end with any final thoughts you have on this topic or anything you want the group to know. We're also going to leave this Zoom running for a few more minutes so we can continue either chat or talk with the video on. So final thoughts, either something or somebody that's inspiring you or any other final thoughts. And I'm going to call on Katrina first, if that's okay.
All right, so my regular job before quarantine and COVID was a concert director, videographer, whatever. So music is a big deal to me. So I have to say this new wave of, I'm gonna say, protest music that's out has really been helping to give me some power, you know, with Childish Gambino. Beyonce came out with this thing out of nowhere, that Black Parade, you know, I listened to that in my car, and I don't know, I feel really proud, and it's nice to hold my head up high like that, listening to this stuff, rolling around Boulder, kind of scaring the white people a little bit, you know, but it's okay, they need to be a little shaken. So yeah, I'd have to say the music these days, and also a lot of the art that I've been seeing as well helps me to stand up straighter sometimes, seeing these portraits of Sandra Bland, George Floyd, whatnot, you know, in these dignified poses. So yeah, just keep making the art.
Thank you so much, Katrina. DJ Joel, what you got? Any final words?
I'm going to echo Katrina and say that I've been finding music to be very satisfying and inspiring and comforting over these last, I can't believe it, 6 months now of being pretty much locked down. As someone who DJs a lot of radio shows, I'm always in pursuit of music, and I've ramped that up even more so during this pandemic, and have discovered a lot of incredible music from around the world, and especially in relationship to like the Black Lives Matter movement. A couple of artists that come to mind are SAULT, S-A-U-L-T, and there's a collective out of Cleveland called Mourning a Black Star, and Tall Black Guy have all come out with some really incredible and powerful, and for me, educational records.
Awesome, thank you. We can all hear you on KGNU, right?
Yep, Terrasonic, Saturday at noon.
Awesome. Marlo, what's inspiring you, or any last thoughts you have?
Reading. I've been reading a lot more. It feels good to be able to kind of come back to something I, again, also neglected over my high school years. Recently, I read The Poet X, which was an amazing book. And it was all written in like prose and poems. And it's a whole novel, actually. It's a fictional novel. And I guess just final thoughts as, you know, to all my fellow white people, you know, our allyship, accomplice, I saw Renee say. This stuff gets hard, and I think it's just really important to reflect on who you are and our history, what we have been a part of, and also our roles that we have played in oppression. And it may be, it's hard work, and at the same time, you know, it's the least that we can do because we haven't been oppressed for hundreds of years. and we have gained from that oppression. So that was just the last piece I wanted to say.
Yeah, thank you, Marlo. Shannon, any last thoughts you want to share?
Yeah, I think there's a couple things that have been inspiring me. A couple female artists. One's here doing a mural, Jody Herrera. She's just been doing phenomenal work. Sydney James, she's going to be at Crush Walls next week. She just finished an incredible mural, which was a play on the girl with the pearl earring, but it's the D earring, because she always wears these incredible D earrings for Detroit. Just an incredible piece. But she'll be in Denver next week. So Sydney James. And in kind of across the pond in England, watching Extinction Rebellion kind of regain the momentum for the climate justice movement. They're always creative. They're always using kind of protests through creative art. They're radical. They're rebellious. They're noisy. They're loud. They glue themselves to the streets and to and they're rowdy in the most beautiful way to fight for climate justice. And they're back. They've been kind of silent through COVID, but they've been really active over the last few weeks, and that's good to see when it seems like we've been kind of sliding backwards because of COVID and not gathering, not having the Friday marches. So that's inspiring to see.
Awesome, thanks, Shannon. Allison, any final thoughts or folks who are inspiring you?
I just wanted to, I'll throw a link in there. The Black Love Mural Festival that happened in Denver Civic City Park during June, when a lot of the protests were happening around there. They put up panels in the park and invited Black artists from Denver to come create murals. So I threw in the link to the Instagram if anyone wants to look at them.
Awesome, thank you. Masani, you're up. Any last thoughts or any folks you think we should check out for inspiration?
I'm just during quarantine, I've been just like doing a lot of art and stuff over the summer. But other than that, no.
Awesome, thank you. I know I've been getting back into it too. Jolt, let's see, somebody was asking for your Instagram link, so we just shared it there in the chat. And let's see, any final thoughts or folks who you're turning to for inspiration right now?
Yeah, currently, I really like the work of the LCAC, the Latino Cultural Arts Center. The show right now at History Colorado, Echo in Colorado, all those artists that are included in that. The Chicano Murals Project is very inspiring to me. The photography and the documentation by local photographer Juan Fuentes is amazing. Painter Diego Rodriguez Warner is very inspiring to me as well. Also, you know, I always have to throw it back to Emmanuel Martinez and Leo Tanguma. These guys are still cutting edge and doing it, and they haven't missed a beat. They're still here. They're still very current. You know, being able to soak up all that, and you know, also the graffiti vandalism of Los Pochos is very inspiring to me right now in the streets of Denver. I can go on and on, but there's a handful of things that I would encourage people to seek out.
That's awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Greg, what you got? I know you've had a super long day, so thank you for hanging with us. You've been
No, you're good. You're good. I don't know. I'm old enough. I'm like 45, so I've been listening to The Clash a lot lately, which has nothing to do with me. But there's a shared experience of looking at, you know, people who are poor and people who are struggling. And there's a podcast that Chuck D from Public Enemy did about The Clash, and just looking at that in terms of like art and activism and the voice that goes along with that. I'm just I don't know, for me, it's always, it's always music, and movies and art, and all of those things kind of all go together. And I'm grateful that we live in a time that all of that is so accessible to us. And, but right now I've been stuck on the Clash, an old punk band from the 70s and 80s. So
That's awesome.
that's all I got.
Yeah, no, that's great. I feel like I want to go listen to the Clash now. Rock out. Okay, so we are going to wrap up. We're super over time, but everybody, thank you so much for spending your snowy evening with us. A few things before we wrap up. Come check out the museum at some point. Put your mask on, come inside. Check out how we're sharing Boulder's past and present. You can see some of Katrina's work in our Since March exhibit. We have a public art project that has just been installed outside called Right On. You can scan some QR codes and learn about the history of civil rights in our country. And obviously Streetwise Mural Festival. So go meet some muralists, ask them some questions, see what their inspiration is, and let's keep talking. We're gonna, like I said, leave this Zoom open for a few minutes. So if anybody has questions, wants to talk to anybody, feel free to drop it in the chat or stay on video. Good night. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Megan.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye. Bye, Leah. Thank you. Thank you, Jolt. I'm going to go find your alley. Thanks, Katrina. Don't leave. Oh, so good to see you. No, you can leave. I'm sure you've had a long day.
Long day homeschooling.
God.
All right. Thanks for having me, Megan. I'll see you later, okay?
Thank you. Have a good night. Say hi to the kiddos.
I will. Bye.
Okay. Patty, are you still there?
I'm here.
Okay. Let's
Thank
see.
you.
Yeah, any
I think we're all good. I feel like we got all the questions in.
Yeah.
Anybody else have any questions?
Us, Rosanna and Diego. Sorry, we had like so many more questions that we didn't get through, but
I think we got most of them actually. I think it was
really?
mostly
Okay,
fun.
good.
Yeah, I don't think we really missed too much.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Excellent.
Have a great
I learned a lot.
night.
It was good. You too. All right, I think we're good. Oh, someone's asking.
Hey, Rosanna. Oh, can you unmute?
Okay, there you go.